The XC90 has been a runaway success for Volvo. It's one of their best-selling models globally, it's the best-selling Volvo in the United States, and it's the second best-selling luxury three-row in America as well. And that's all despite, or perhaps maybe even because of the fact that it's actually one of the older three-row SUVs on sale in the US. It dates back to 2015 when it first launched as a 2016 model year vehicle. Although Volvo does changes generally differently than other car companies. You see, when you look at that second generation XC90 when it first launched and one today, you can see that it's the same vehicle, but it also has been updated and freshened over the years inside and outside to help keep it current. But for 2025, we're definitely getting more of a heavy refresh. Significant changes inside and outside to keep it competitive. But yep, you guessed it, it's not a complete redesign on the SPA2 platform that underpins the new EX90. So they are going to be selling XC90 and EX90 together. They're almost exactly the same size inside and out. One's fully electric, one's at least a mild hybrid with the plug-in hybrid system available. Let's take a look at what's changed for 2025. Obviously, the first thing you're going to notice is the new front-end design. It borrows a little bit from the EX90, but it does not borrow those shuttered headlights that we find in the EX90. Instead, it has more of a traditional lamp design. And that sort of makes sense because they're keeping the EX90 and the XC90 a little bit separate in the dealer showrooms. One might appeal to someone that wants the latest in Swedish Scandinavian design, definitely a little bit more tech forward with some of the way that they've moved around the electronic controls in the EX90 interior, whereas the XC90 interior is a little bit more traditional, but still tech forward, just in a slightly different way. You'll really notice the new grille. Let me know what you think about this design down there in the comment section. When I first saw these photos, my initial thought was, wow, I really like that design, and I am surprised they haven't done something like this before. The way that the lines interact with the little arrow in the Volvo logo, that's the logo for iron, and then we have the ones coming down at not quite a 90-degree angle, but kind of a jaunty angle versus the rest. I really like that look, and I hope that makes its way to the rest of their gasoline lineup. Other than that, you'll notice that most of the design carries over from last year. The rear end design is very, very similar. I haven't seen very many photos of the rear end, but it looks very similar to last year's XC90. And again, that's because this is more of a refresh than a redesign. On the inside, we see new materials and a different dashboard design. The first thing that sticks out on the dash quite literally is the new infotainment system. It's bigger than before, 11.2 inches versus the old 9-inch screen, but it's also smaller than the one that we find in the new EX90. Volvo says that was because they didn't want to change the hard mounting points on the dashboard, so things like the HVAC, plumbing, etc., that stays roughly where it was in the pre-refresh XC90. And without changing some of those hard points around, they just couldn't stuff that enormous screen in the dashboard. But in order to make this one work, they did have to kind of pull it out from the dash a little bit, so it's a little bit like a vertical tablet screen mounted on the dashboard. We then get the air vents on each side, as you saw before, and basically the same LCD instrument cluster, although I haven't been able to see it, so it's possible there are a few software tweaks. Now, speaking of software tweaks, this receives a lot of the same software updates from the Google operating system-based system in the EX90, but not quite everything. Most importantly, wireless CarPlay is missing. Now, for me, I don't really care because I never use wireless CarPlay, but if you are a fan of wireless smartphone projection, that may be one reason to get the EX over the XC. They didn't exactly say why it doesn't have wireless CarPlay, but they did say that it's not coming later. It's just not offered on this particular system. The rest of the controls inside, you can see they're very similar to before, so we get the same steering wheel, definitely different than the one on the EX90, and actually, I like the design of this steering wheel a little bit more. The dashboard, it's relatively similar to the outgoing XC90, but there have been some changes here and there. It has a little bit more of a horizontal theme, but the button bank below the screen, it's basically the same. We also seem to get an updated shifter there, and of course we have new materials in the cabin. Volvo has been pushing not just their electrification initiative, but also being more sustainable and more environmentally friendly in everything that they do, and the XC90 is certainly getting a touch of that. We still have the sustainable wool upholstery available. It's a wool and polyester blend from recycled polyester sources, but we also now get their Nordico bio-sourced imitation leather. If you'd rather have Nappa leather, you can still have that, and that has been ethically sourced as well. If you want the ventilated seats, you have to get the Nappa leather. There is no ventilated seat option for the wool upholstery or for the Nordico upholstery option, apparently. I like the muted interior tones that we find in this model. I actually have to say that Volvo's color palette has developed pretty nicely since this generation of XC90 launched, and that's one of the things I like about it, is that it's not just black or white or just an all-black interior. There is a little bit of warmth and a little bit of color expressed in here. The shapes of the speaker grills, the door panels, and the outboard air vents up front seem consistent with the outgoing model, but you can see that the grille pattern has changed a little bit to keep it more current and more in tune with the EX90. You'll also notice that there's definitely a lot of premium stitched material going on in here, something that the XC90 has long been known for. It's definitely a middle ground between something like a Mercedes-Benz GLS or a BMW X7 and the Acura MDX. Price-wise, feature set-wise, quality-wise, etc., it's right there in the middle. Volvo has not said how much the XC90 will cost in every trim, but we know it's going to set you back at least $58,450 plus destination. And that means it's going to be about $1,850 more expensive than the outgoing model. Not all the details are firmly set in stone, and we don't know the pricing on every version, but we know what the engine lineup is going to be, and this may disappoint some folks. It is not a full hybrid. I know there were a lot of rumors out there swirling that maybe Volvo would make it a plug-in only, or maybe they would make this a full hybrid, something along those lines. Nope, we still have the choice of two different mild hybrids. No major changes there, although they say that the engines have been retuned to run on the Miller cycle for improved efficiency. And then we have the T8 all-wheel drive plug-in hybrid system available. So 247 horsepower, 266 pound-feet of torque in the base B5 all-wheel drive. All-wheel drive will be standard. The B6 bumps that up to 295 horsepower, and the T8 takes that all the way up to 455 horsepower with 32 miles of all-electric range. As with last year's XC90, there are going to be three different trim levels. Core is the base model, Plus is the mid-level trim, and then Ultra is the top-level trim. And you're going to have the choice of 6 or 7 seats in the United States. There's not going to be a 2-row version of the XC90, although in some world markets there will be, just in case you're wondering. Overall, the size of the XC90 is the same. So we don't get any extra legroom, we don't get any extra headroom. The core structure of this vehicle remains constant. Continuing down the list of changes, Volvo says that they've added extra sound insulation to the vehicle in the A pillars, the B pillars, and elsewhere in the vehicle to make this the quietest XC90 ever. And that's a good thing because the XC90 is not in the quietest group in that 3-row segment right now. And then they have also tweaked the suspension. I'm really curious to see how this rides in person. They've tweaked not just the regular steel spring suspension, but also the adaptive air suspension. We get a new link in the rear suspension to improve stability and traction while towing. We get frequency adaptive dampers in the back. Basically, there are 2 different valves in there, and they behave differently to small and large imperfections. And then we get an upgraded air suspension for improved ride comfort, and they say better handling and more relaxed feel as well. Now let's talk about what Volvo did not change. Volvo is not giving us, again, wireless CarPlay integration. They're also not giving us the phone as key feature that we find in the EX90. I'm actually not too sad about that because the phone as key function in the EX90 was kind of funky, to be honest, in the way that it worked, at least in the pre-production models I was driving recently. And even in vehicles where I have had the phone as key capability, I have generally preferred to use the fob. However, if you are interested in phone as key capability, you're going to have to go towards the EX90 because it's not here on the XC90. Obviously, the other thing that we don't get here is the platform from the EX90. And that did surprise me a little bit because back when Volvo announced SPA 2, the platform that the EX90 rides on, they announced that it would be a dual-purpose platform. And I thought that was really novel from an engineering standpoint because basically what they had done was they designed a rear suspension unit and they designed a crash structure that were common, and then connecting the two, they designed 2 different variants of the floor, one for an ICE vehicle and then one for a dedicated EV. So they could share the front suspension and some of the crash structure, and they could share the rear suspension and some of the crash structure, but what was in the middle allowed them the flexibility to create a full skateboard EV like the EX90, or something with a driveline hump that you'd need in something like an XC90. But oddly, that is not what we got, and there were no explanations for exactly why. But because this is not a SPA 2 platform vehicle, we don't find some of the features and some of the controversial things that we find on the EX90. So the seat switches, those remain the same. We still have 4 window switches on the driver's side. They didn't delete window switches like we find in the EX90. We don't have the updated ADAS systems or the autonomous driving assistance systems that are available on the EX90. So no LiDAR module on the XC90. It uses the more traditional Volvo radar, ultrasonic, and camera setup. It is, of course, going to give give you things like 360-degree camera, blind spot monitoring, the runoff road mitigation stuff, all of that jazz. It's just not going to give you that next level of autonomy that is promised for the EX90. I'm actually okay with that because currently none of those systems actually function on the EX90. A lot of that is coming soon, and there's the promise of it because all the hardware is baked into the EX90, and that's some of what you're paying for. And I'm actually okay that on the XC90 at the moment, it's not there. Now, if those systems come to market really quickly for the EX90 and they're fantastic, then I think it would be a bit more of a problem that they're missing on the XC90. My personal guess is that after a few years, if we still see a ton of XC90s going out the door, Volvo might give it a second life, but the future is a little bit uncertain. Perhaps the most important thing that has not changed with the XC90 is its size. For most folks, it's still going to be kind of a Goldilocks-sized vehicle. The back seat is not as small as something like the one in the BMW X5 or the Genesis GV80, but it's not as large as the one in the Lexus TX or an X7, etc. It's right there in line with its most direct competitor, the Acura MDX. And that's why it's kind of logical to me that the MDX is the bestseller and that this is nipping right on its heels. And I suspect, in all honesty, if Volvo can build enough XC90s, it might just become the bestseller in the US. It's actually not far off the MDX in terms of sales. And a lot of that seems to be because the Lexus TX has come out and it's really taken a lot of sales from Acura, but it doesn't seem to have actually taken any sales away from Volvo and the XC90. And that makes sense because, honestly, the XC90 has aged incredibly gracefully. It's still one of the best looking entries in this segment, even pre-refresh, and it has one of the nicest interiors. Those two things together are logically why Volvo decided not to rock the boat, and they're giving us an upgraded XC90 rather than trying to completely reinvent the wheel on the new platform. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Now, obviously, of course, they didn't completely redesign it because this is less expensive. So before anybody comments that down there, I will just say that out loud as well. The one remaining thing I should mention, actually, before we go, is that they did not put a faster AC level 2 charger on the plug-in hybrid. It's still the same 3.7 kilowatt charger. So that does mean that your AC charge times on the XC90 are not going to be any faster than before. It's still going to be about 5 hours for a complete charge, although it's not the biggest deal.